Okay, so let's talk about influences. Unfortunately, influences from minority groups are held up by people outside of those groups as speaking for said minority groups. This is obviously bullshit. No one was accusing all white people or all gingers of being sex pests just because Louis C.K. got Me Too'd, but people love to tokenize, and take aspects of that token as the final say on the group they represent. This isn't just an issue with influencer culture either, or even celebrity culture, its progenitor. If someone has a preconceived view of a certain group, they will rush to find a person that embodies these preconceived notions, and then use the fact of their existence to paint entire communities with the negative stereotypes they've already decided are inherent to that group. This is the most obvious with the way people from September the 11th until now will conflate all Muslims with those who flew the planes that day, despite the vast majority of Muslims being completely against those actions. Something you could find out from a single conversation or a single Google search if you were actually interested, which obviously these people aren't. Their hatred comes first. The justifications come after the fact, and only exist to confirm their pre-existing suspicions, and to keep as ammunition to throw out whenever someone questions them on their obviously discriminatory ideas and attitudes, to trick the other person and themselves into thinking that they reason themselves into their bigotry, which obviously they didn't. And one of the biggest indicators of this is that populations that go on to higher education tend to be less bigoted. And in places that are multicultural, like most cities in Britain for example, overtly prejudicial attitudes are less common than they are in rural areas, where most people are white, straight, and conservative. That doesn't mean that bigotry doesn't exist in these communities, but it's often different, more insidious. Since the internet became a mainstay of culture across the world, we've moved into a global culture, at least in certain regards. And one aspect of this global culture is that anyone can find representatives of any group, and follow them, observing their behaviour, forming their own opinions about them, and learning in a very limited sense, and I say limited because what people see when they follow a queer or trans, for example, influencer, is the version of themselves they present online, which is, at best, only a small aspect of the person behind the account, and usually a performance. And even then, even the most authentic influencers are inauthentic by the very nature of not streaming their entire life to their audiences 24/7. In this way, the proliferation of influencers of all backgrounds across the entire world has both good and bad aspects. Marginalised groups now have a voice that they never had before, even in countries where they are completely underground as a community. They can interact online with people who don't have to hide. The other side of this coin is, for people who come into this space with certain prejudices, when someone who they are already suspicious of because they belong to a particular group is outed as a bad person, it is very easy for them to imagine that the wrongs a marginalised influencer has done apply to their entire community. Especially if the only person you've ever heard of from that group is the one who's been outed. For trans people, we've had Caitlyn Jenner's behaviour thrown at us time and time again, despite the community never claiming her. And compared to the behaviour of this latest influencer, that was small potatoes. We have to make it clear to everyone that one person's actions do not represent all of us. That should be obvious, and to most people it is. But there is a group of very driven, highly organised people who are ready to argue the opposite, because they want us back in the closet, or worse. We need to make sure that we make it clear that we condemn this individual's actions, while also making it clear that using them to attack trans people in general, using this as an excuse for misgendering, accusations that we are all groomers or perverts, or dismissing the testimony of victims in order to strengthen a narrative, these should all be off limits. We are people. Some of us are assholes. If anything, that should make it clear how disappointingly normal trans people are. Some of us are great, and some of us should be in jail. Mr. Beast is the biggest YouTuber in the world. As such, anyone in his orbit is going to have a platform bigger than most people, let alone most trans people, could ever dream of. Their names will be broadcast to the entire world. Their existence a beacon of hope for trans people who need representation to feel permission to transition, especially when they live in communities where being trans is not yet normalised, or they have family that's not accepting and keeps them hidden. And that's what makes the allegations against Ava Kris Tyson so disappointing, and in some aspects so hard to talk about. Because despite the fact that the people who started these rumours that led to the latest public backlash were trying to smear her because she's trans, to the point where the person they were holding up as her victim came out and said that she'd done nothing wrong and never did anything bad to her, in the days since, some pretty bad shit has come out even beyond that. And we should be able to talk about that and condemn it without falling for far-right narratives, and by centering victims instead of talking over them. So let's talk about Ava Kris Tyson, and why we should believe victims, not use them to craft misleading narratives, especially when there are real stories of abuse and bad behaviour here. Adding false narratives, and trying to fit the story of a potential abuser into the fascist crusade that is the groomer panic, takes away from the real victims of this story, and the real behaviour we should be speaking out against. So, first off, I gotta say that I'm very disappointed how quick some people have been to buy into far-right smear campaigns, especially against trans women. The moment someone comes out as transgender, especially if they're in the public eye, they get a world of shit held at them by people who hate us, desperate to paint all trans people as creeps, predators, or even worse. Now, this doesn't mean we shouldn't believe victims, quite the opposite. But if you see someone who, for example, explicitly ignores the testimony of the victim of their story, explicitly testifying that nothing bad happened and that they weren't victimized, just so they can maintain their narrative, maybe someone who intentionally misgenders someone in their attacks, making it clear they don't respect trans people in general, someone who, in their accusations, theorizes that someone transitioned because their wife fell out with them over creepy behavior, which is something I saw in one of these videos and is just, what? How could anyone listen to someone say that and then take them seriously? Or if, say, the person making the accusations has pictures with actual murderer Kyle Rittenhouse and wants us to seriously believe that they care about victims? In general, when an accusation is made, we should be centering the victims of said accusation. And in the case of the initial allegations made against Ava Tyson, trans public figure and best friend of the biggest YouTuber on the planet, and every YouTube thumbnail designer's sleep paralysis demon, Mr. Beast, the victim was not centered at all. What was instead centered is a drive for clout chasing from drama channels, who clearly were waiting for any excuse to dunk on a trans woman, especially because the most damning allegations they made were that she groomed a teenager, who has a platform and who has come out and explicitly said, "These videos are massive lies and twisting the truth. Ava never did anything wrong and just made a few edgy jokes. I was never exploited or taken advantage of. Can you do me a favour and comment on these videos and tell them to stop spreading lies? This situation takes away from children who are actively being exploited every day online. I am not a victim of anything being included in these videos or at all. Kris did nothing wrong. What's actually disgusting is you guys twisting things and making me a victim." He also made it clear that all the incriminating messages were in public channels, not one-on-one, which does change the dynamic a little bit. He also clarified he never met with Ava one-on-one, and requested that everyone make this clear so as not to spread misinformation. So, how do we deal with allegations of bad behaviour? We lift up the victims and we listen to them. In this case, this would mean disregarding these particular allegations, unless LavaGS, who made this statement, ever takes it back or something to that effect. Instead, the comments under this post are insisting that he has Stockholm Syndrome, which that's not what Stockholm Syndrome means, and even if it were, Stockholm Syndrome is a myth, but that's a story for another video. Otherwise, people are saying they don't believe him, and will continue to spread the story, that it's okay, that they don't need to lie anymore, and of course, a lot of misgendering, and the reason this story worries me so much, the twisting of an accusation, just under its denial by its alleged victim, to paint all trans people as creeps and inherently criminal. Now, that being said, even in public channels, which these discords apparently were, it is kind of weird to be talking to minors. It's not illegal, but it is weird. Influencers, whether they recognize it or not, are in a position of power over their fans. When these fans are children, I do think they have a responsibility to just kind of leave them the hell alone. Keep it professional. A lot of adults have a problem making the distinction between parasocial and actually social friendships, never mind people that are still learning to socialize. And while the victim in this scenario made it clear he wasn't groomed, making the kind of jokes Ava was making at the time, in an environment where she knew children were present, is just shitty behaviour, if nothing else. It is, no matter how you slice it, a bit creepy. Does that make it grooming? No, because words mean things, but it does make it creepy, and it should be condemned. Ava has since apologised for making these jokes, but not specifically for making them around minors, which, the jokes are problematic enough on their own to warrant an apology, but put them in the context of being around minors and, yeah, it's weird fucking behaviour. Now, just because I believe the victim in this scenario, and don't think this admittedly weird behaviour is quite what the far right were making it out to be, even though it is creepy and already had me looking sideways, well, that doesn't mean I don't find the other allegations bad. I just want people to be clear that we take allegations seriously. We don't jump to conclusions. We listen to victims and let them determine the narrative. That is not what's happening here. In regard to the other stuff, I'll address them in order of when they were revealed. which will, unfortunately for the tone of this, mean that these claims will become more problematic as the video goes on. So please don't take this as a defense of someone who's allegedly done some very bad things. I just want to take these one claim at a time. So first, the Shadman stuff. So, for those of you who don't know, one of the legitimate claims I've seen against Ava Tyson is that she actively supported and was friends with the artist Shadman, a notorious online figure who used to be known for drawing illicit material, and on occasion, goblins, which is what I'll be calling CP from here on out. In addition, he once made this kind of art of YouTuber Keemstar's daughter. This is absolutely indefensible. This guy was a monster, and they were supported by Ava several years ago. The most recent evidence I could find of them interacting with this guy was in 2019, so still years ago, but it's not like they shouldn't have known better. She has apologized for this profusely in the years since, but if I were a victim of this goblin artist, I don't know if I'd be able to forgive her for that, especially with the context we now have of her regularly interacting with minors, even if it was in public forums. It is indefensible. But importantly, this isn't the accusation people were leading with, because it would implicate a whole bunch of other people that have and still do interact with this guy, that the people trying to take down Ava still support. Does that absolve her of this? Absolutely not. Personally, that crosses a line for me. I would need to see her making a real effort to make amends for this to even begin to put this behind her. And honestly, I don't know enough to know what that would even look like. And with the accusations that followed this stuff, the stuff that came out in the following days that's even worse, and with her failing to address this in her recent statements, it all comes together to paint quite a dark picture. However, unlike other creators, Ava has apologized and distanced herself from Shadman. Whereas people like Belle Delphine, Shoe-on-Head, Count Dankula, Notch, The Amazing Atheist, Ricky Berwick, Sky Williams, Chris Raygun, Rhett and Link, Ego Raptor, and a whole bunch of other edgy YouTube and Twitch stars either still interact with this guy or who have never apologized for associating with him. At the time, he was one of the biggest artists on the internet. Which is fucked. Why were so many people okay with this? That's awful. People I followed before still follow him, have commissioned art by him, and have been friends with him too. Jessica Negri collaborated with him. Plague of Gripes follows him. The guys that make Smiling Friends live with him, are friends with him, and interviewed him. The Game Grumps were friends with him. This doesn't make it right, but it makes her just as complicit as tons of other influencers. Does this suck? Absolutely. But people making this into an attack on the entire trans community, as if one of us being awful should torpedo any fight for trans rights? That's ludicrous. This is bigger than us. If anything, having one trans person be among the dozens of cis people who also propped up this monster means we're just as normal, just as fucked up a group as anyone else. Some trans people are monsters. Some cis people are monsters. That does not mean that trans people are undeserving of your sympathy and your solidarity. On top of this context, this is stuff from years ago. And apparently it was the edgy thing to do in her circles to joke around with that stuff. But it's still gross, and yeah, I've made my opinions on this sort of thing clear before with my last relapse into commenting on creator drama, something I promised I'd never do again. Here we are. The thing is, stories like these being spread uncritically are very dangerous for the trans community. So it is important we get our stories straight, which is why I'm doing this at all. Don't spread far-right lies, and be clear which, if any, allegations are something we need to address, and which are part of the ongoing smear campaign against any and all trans people by the far right. For what it's worth, Ava has gone on record apologising for her interactions with the goblin people, and the person who famously made those goblins. You can accept that or you can't. It's not up to me to do that for you, nor should it be. I would be wary of her for that alone, and I'll put this into context. I'm wary of the whole crop of creators that did exactly the same thing, not just her, of which there were a lot. Treating this goblin man as a lolcow and interacting with him as some sort of edgy joke? Personally, I find that shit pretty much indefensible. But the same people who are bringing this up to attack Ava don't have the same heat for others who acted the same way. They are operating on a double standard here. By all means, let's condemn everyone who participated in this. But they don't care to. Because they don't care about justice for victims, or for putting a stop to goblins, which is righteous. No. They have a particular target in mind, and outside of her, they have no issue with this. Just today, at the time of writing, she made a post apologising for her bad behaviour and bad edgy jokes. You don't have to accept this apology. I don't think I could. And with the accusations that followed, I really can't. But the responses to this apology post should make it clear that many of the people attacking her are not doing it out of genuine concern for people hurt by her interacting with Shadman, but out of malice towards her for being trans. And if you have fucking Keemstar of all people, the person with the most righteous case against Shadman given he drew his own fucking daughter, even despite him being a notorious asshole and drama hound, he's dismissing the allegations about the grooming? Yeah, this isn't what these people trying to build their drama channels out shock allegations are making out like it is. And by that, I mean it isn't proof the trans community are the groomers the far right says we are. It's proof that just like every community on this planet, some of us are pieces of shit. It would honestly be weirder if one of us wasn't caught doing shit like this, given how many members of every other community were. So, I'm not defending the goblin stuff, at all. Exactly the opposite. That sucks, and I hate it. What I want to do here, however, is urge people not to jump on right-wing smear campaigns, even if there are valid accusations hidden in there. The big thing being shared around was this story that was immediately dismissed in its strongest terms by the alleged victim. We can't bring justice to victims when we dismiss their words and intentions. The goblins, that's fair game. Fuck that. But be wary, because this isn't the last time you're going to see false allegations against a trans person in the public eye, and we need to be critical, victim-centered, and with an eye towards justice. Because we shouldn't stand with people who are out for dunking on trans people for views and clout. We should instead be standing with victims. And in this case, the alleged victim told us what he wants people to do. He wants them to condemn these stories as false, and argue against them whenever they turn up. The other victims, that's a different story. But yeah, fuck goblins. That's a whole separate issue. We can and should condemn that in the strongest terms. But none of that should have any bearing on the weaponization of false allegations against her, especially when these allegations are being used to portray all trans people as abusers, or, in the case of the original video that was going around, to portray trans people as just transitioning to get away with abuse, which is... there are no words. It's just ridiculous, hateful nonsense. But if you find yourself agreeing with Gays Against Groomers, Sneeko, and Andrew Tate, and standing with them against the victim these people are supposedly defending, you should be questioning whose narrative you've bought into here. In fact, unsurprisingly, if you look this stuff up, one of the first things you'll see is a thread on Kiwi Farms, the notorious harassment website, digging up dirt on Ava for the purpose of harassment, all because she's trans. And there's a reason the goblin stuff doesn't come up very often, because the guy she was interacting with there was close with so many other content creators, and huge content creators. He was popular, and so many influencers were complicit in spreading his goblin shit. The people making these accusations aren't interested in taking down this purveyor of goblins. They should be, but they're not. Instead, they're interested in attacking one person in particular, and ignoring all the other people who were involved, and have not yet apologized. Yes, her apologizing will not be enough for most people. I get it, and it shouldn't be. It is more than a lot of other people who did similar things around this goblin man did, and yet, that doesn't make it right. I still can't look past that, to be honest. It still sucks. I still hate it. I just want us to be very clear why this is happening, and the motivations of those spreading these narratives. It doesn't make it right, but it puts things more into context. And this is important because this can and will be used by transphobic and fascist trolls to smear all trans people as predators. They want to paint one of us with this brush so they can paint all of us with it. This is how they view minority groups, as inherently malicious, and they are constantly looking for justifications for that narrative they've already built to justify their disgust at our very existence. People will use these allegations as a bludgeon against the community, despite this just being one person, despite the victim denying these allegations, and despite the actual yikes stuff not being a trans problem, but a problem with the influencer community whenever it was coming up. Don't let them. You can condemn Ava for what she did, but don't add on stuff she explicitly did not do. And don't let this be used as a cudgel with which to beat the entire trans community, particularly from actual convicted creeps like Andrew Tate. Ava should be condemned for her friendliness with Shad, and so should everyone else who did the same. But they won't be. The initial complaint was explicitly denied. So yeah, Mr. Beast Lady bad, but not for the reasons these people were trying to make out. She's bad for enabling and encouraging a monster, as did half of the influencers you've probably heard of. It sucks, but it doesn't mean that these internet crusaders are right about trans people being predators. It means that influencer culture has developed the same sicknesses as mainstream celebrity culture. An instinct to buddy up with and protect awful people, because they have clout, no matter how awful their deeds. And the deeds are awful. Fuck them and fuck the culture that enabled this shit to fester. And fuck anyone who defends people who draw goblins. But don't try and pin this on the trans community. Even with the most bad faith interpretation of this awful situation, making this a trans community issue is a fucking stretch. Now, with that out of the way, let's get to the accusations that don't involve anything that can be twisted into grooming, but are bad. Real bad. And in retrospect, make all the other stuff look much worse. They don't validate the narrative of the far right because they have nothing to do with minors, but they are genuinely awful. And in this case, when we center victims, as we always should, we reach a point where Ava's behavior is beyond bad and is genuinely indefensible. A few days ago, videos surfaced of Ava Tyson showing revenge of Jeanette McCurdy, a former child star recently back in the zeitgeist as the author of I'm Glad My Mum Died. This is horrible. This is a violation, and something I haven't seen her apologise for. Even if she did, this is over the line. There's not much more to say on this other than its horrific behaviour. For those of you who don't know what revenge is, this refers to the releasing of intimate photos and video that were sent by a partner as part of some kind of relationship, or possibly stolen from them or someone else, which are proliferated and shared around as a way of shaming and degrading the person depicted in this material, usually in revenge for breaking up with the partner these were sent to, or for similarly petty and vindictive reasons. This is non-consensual exploitation, and an exercise in misogynistic public humiliation. I have nothing else to say on this except for that this is a red line. There is no excuse for this. The sharing of revenge is an act of misogynistic violence, and with the final revelation in mind, it demonstrates a pattern of behaviour worse than anything the far-right smear campaign attempted to pull. This may have begun as an anti-trans hate campaign, but that lost a lot of steam when it became clear the initial claims were bogus or indicative of a much wider problem. This should have led to a general exposé of everyone who worked with or stayed in contact with Shadman. It didn't, because the far-right didn't care to, for obvious reasons. But due to the scrutiny Ava was now under, more stuff was uncovered, and more people felt safe speaking out. And because we believe victims, unlike the far-right who spoke over them to try and create a story that fit their narrative, we need to talk about the most damning allegations of all. On July 27th, a Twitter user, Muskina, @gendermillennial, posted a long thread with a litany of receipts in the form of screenshots of conversations on multiple platforms, in which she accused Ava Kris Tyson of SA. In the thread, she thoroughly details an abusive relationship in which Ava went from promising her a part in a Mr. Beast video to coercing her into acts I can't talk about on YouTube without this video being taken down, and much more. I'll link to the thread in the description of this video. You'll be seeing screenshots from it now, but I recommend you read the entire thread for yourself. It's both extensive and extremely damning. Beyond the essay, the thread details an ongoing abuse of power on Ava's part, getting this person a job, firing her when it became clear that she didn't want a sexual relationship anymore, and lying to HR to make it look like she resigned, when it was clear in messages that she was being replaced for not putting out anymore. There is some stuff in this thread that is genuinely hard to read and very disturbing, and unfortunately, it puts all of the earlier accusations into context. Honestly, it had me questioning whether I was wrong for initially questioning the allegations at all. I originally wrote a version of this video where I was purely talking about centering victims, and with that lens, represented the allegations as a split story, with a set of false allegations on one side to create an anti-trans panic, and a genuine scandal centering around Shadman and the community of influencers who are associated with CP artist. But the more I wrote, and the more I sat on it, the less comfortable I was with that. Yes, the Shadman stuff was bad, but the stuff Ava phrased in her apology as edgy jokes was, the more I looked at it and the more I researched it, beyond edgy jokes. Because of this context, even this not being in a one-on-one settings, minors were in that Discord, and that changes things. Yes, this does not technically break any rules, but I couldn't in good faith try and present this narrative as complicated. Whether it's illegal or not, her behaviour was gross. And with the Shadman stuff on top of that, I found myself feeling genuinely dirty having read all of this stuff. Like I needed to wash myself clean for just seeing the evidence. And then the revenge stuff came out, and I scrapped this altogether. But after reading this thread, after reading the most serious allegations to date, I had to come back to this. Because the message was still important. It is imperative that we center victims, believe victims, and distinguish between far-right smears and genuine allegations of poor behaviour and worse. Making weird jokes around minors was gross, but the fact that it was spun into something it wasn't to fit a far-right narrative took away from her actual misdeeds. Something that began to look like more and more of a pattern, with first the Shadman stuff and then the revenge. With the latest allegations, it's clearer than ever that one of the biggest injustices of this story is the very way it was initially framed. Because this started as a clout-chasing anti-trans crusade by drama YouTubers and Kiwi farms. The framing of the allegations just didn't stand up to scrutiny. But looking at the evidence without the framing, especially with the most recent allegations, free of the context of a grooming smear, makes it clear that this is a story of abuse. Abuse of power, SA, and a person acting with impunity by using their position of power as an influencer to get away with reprehensible acts. And when you put it like that, it's clear, isn't it, that this has nothing to do with her being trans. Like many people in the public eye before her, the story of the allegations against Ava Tyson is a story of a celebrity abusing their power, and using it to indulge in some of their worst instincts. The reason the original far-right narrative did not accurately tell this story is because it doesn't fit their narrative. As Moonskinner says in her thread, both her and Ava met as adults. This is not a story about grooming, and this is not a story about the dangers of trans people. This is a story about abuse, and the potential danger of influencers, who through their relationship with their fans, especially in the age of creators directly interacting with their fans on a regular basis, with no go-betweens and no boundaries, have a uniquely smooth path from being a star to directly abusing their power, turning their fans into victims. Thanks for watching. If you got to the end of this video, sorry you had to hear that. This wasn't a cheery one. Next time will be more cheery, probably, because I'm going to be talking about Tenacious D or Deadpool or SciShow or something like that. The SciShow one won't be cheery so much, but it will have jokes, so that's something. If you maybe enjoyed this is the wrong word. If you found this enlightening, or that sounds pretentious. Okay, let me give up. You can give me money. If you want to. You can give me one-time donations on Coffee or PayPal, links below as always, or sign up to my Patreon or the YouTube members feed, which is also a thing you can do. These have the same things as the Patreon, just, yeah, if you do it with the YouTube thing, it'll go through my YouTube thing. Yeah. You understand how that works. Anyway, if you do that, you'll get earlier videos, access to the members-only Discord, my Nintendo Switch friend code, and exclusive content such as long-form interviews, that wasn't English, such as long-form interviews with Princess Weeks, Rosencrantz, and Jessie Gender, among other things. And you'll also get your name read out at the end of each video, just like these lovely people. I'm very sorry for these lovely people to have your name read out at the end of this video. I said I'm going to do it at the end. Let me know in the future if you're uncomfortable with it being read at the end of especially depressing stuff. It shouldn't be a problem most of the time. This is mostly a comedy left channel. But sometimes I do talk about depressing stuff, and there is one coming up in like a month and a half. It's not like this, it's about global issues and less influencer stuff, obviously, because I don't want to talk about any drama again. I'm done. This is my last time talking about another creator. Famous last words. Anyway, these lovely people are great. You should be like them. Marva Underhaw, Tanzin, Bob the Builder, 5445554, Isha, Nadine Della, Deborah Laboon, Vegish, Zillas Athenium, Vince Whitaker, Amelia Unchained, Sarah Rudston, Jason Haig, Frank McManus, Susan Foster, Helena, Sierra Whiskey, Orestria, Ali Catgirl, John N, Scully, Jan, Lloyd Luciente, Jason Cribbett, Shield Daden, Robin Podolsky, Turtle Choom, Casual Observer, Terry Roberts, Manta Ray, Courtney Burmack, Sleepy Slug, Philippa Tabrogga, Soma Piglet, Brain Douche, Artie Wolf, Greg Noble, Deanna McMillan, Caroline Regalado, Alexandra Lilly, Howard Lott, Narania, Scarjan, and Joey Cobalt. Thank you all. Next time will be something else.